You should be thankful you're still sitting in this room. The sentence landed like a silent slap. Clara Bennett stood in the center of the meeting room, while every eye weighed on her at once. The surrounding glass reflected her own image, small, still, out of place, surrounded by people who pretended not to look but heard every word. Ethan Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He held the report with only one hand, as if it were too light to deserve his full attention. "This mistake," he said, tapping the paper gently against the table, "isn't just carelessness. It's a lack of preparation." A heavy silence spread. Clara felt her heart race, but she kept her eyes down. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she wasn't responsible for that data. Still, she didn't speak. Ethan tilted his head slightly, an almost compassionate gesture. "I've explained this more than once," he continued. "Maybe the problem is that some people need more time to keep up." A short laugh escaped from somewhere in the room. Too fast to be confronted. Loud enough to hurt. Clara squeezed her fingers tight, feeling her fingernails press into her palm. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, taking it all in. "Sit down," Ethan finally said with a polite smile. "Let's move on." She went back to her chair in silence, feeling her face burn, as if she had been exposed without ever truly being seen. At the far end of the room, near the glass wall, Robert Hayes watched. He didn't react. He didn't interrupt. But something in his gaze hardened. He had seen this before, and it always ended the same way. When nobody did anything. In that room, everyone reached the same conclusion without exchanging a single word. Clara Bennett was weak. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, justice, and second chances, consider subscribing. As a thank you, you'll receive good emotional stories like this every week. But this didn't start today. The air conditioning kept the office at a constant, almost clinical cold. The white lights reflected on the polished floor, creating an environment where everything seemed too clean, too quiet. The sound of typing echoed like distant rain. Printers groaned. Phones vibrated. Clara arrived early. Always. The building was still half empty when she passed through the security gate, holding her badge with excessive care, as if it could be taken from her at any moment. Her footsteps echoed alone in the long hallway, surrounded by glass walls that reflected her image from every angle. She liked that time of day. It was the only moment she didn't have to defend herself. She would sit down, organize her desk with almost obsessive precision, aligning documents, adjusting her chair, and taking a deep breath before starting. There, in that controlled silence, she remembered what was at stake. Because before this internship, there were months of closed doors. There were interviews that never called back, polite emails that ended in rejection, empty smiles from the other side of the desk. There were nights when she actually thought she would never make it. That's why, when this position opened up, Clara made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't lose this. Not now. Not like this. Even if she had to swallow her pride. Even if she had to endure the weight of the silence. And that's how it all began. In the beginning, they were small comments, almost harmless. "You don't speak up enough. You need to learn to be firmer. Maybe this environment is too intense for you." Always followed by a smile, always in public. Always too subtle to be called cruelty. Clara just took notes, on her phone, in saved files, in her memory. And she kept working. Because there was a reason she never reacted. And nobody in that company had any idea what it was. The office had its own sound when it was still empty. It wasn't absolute silence. It was something lower, almost mechanical. The constant hum of the air conditioning. The distant click of a door closing on another floor. The soft echo of her own steps down the too long hallway. Clara walked slowly, holding her coat close to her body. The cold never really bothered her, but she kept the habit, as if that simple gesture helped keep everything in place. The lights weren't even fully on when she reached her desk. The computer screen reflected her face for a second before waking up. Attentive eyes, slight dark circles, a tiredness that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from the constant effort of keeping herself together. She took a deep breath. There, in that moment, nobody was watching. Nobody was evaluating. Nobody was measuring her value, and that mattered more than it seemed. But that hadn't started there either. Before that modern office, before the glass, before the badge, there was a long string of waiting. Small rooms, uncomfortable chairs, repeated questions. Have you ever worked under pressure? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Clara answered carefully. Always polite, always prepared. Even so, the answers never came. Or they came too late. When she finally got that internship, there was no celebration, just relief. The kind of relief that makes someone sit on the bedroom floor, lean their back against the wall, and close their eyes for a few extra seconds. She knew what that meant. It wasn't stability. It wasn't security. It was just a chance. And you don't waste chances. In the first few days, everything seemed normal, even promising. Ethan Cole was respected, called demanding, but fair. Someone who prepared people for the real world. He smiled during meetings, praised when someone got it right, and corrected firmly when he felt it was necessary. With Clara, it was different. At first, it was almost unnoticeable. He interrupted when she spoke. He repeated what she had said, using different words. He praised the idea, without mentioning her name. Nothing that could be reported. Nothing that could be proven. Clara noticed quickly, and she decided to observe. The first comment came in a small, almost informal meeting. "You're very quiet," Ethan said, smiling. "In this environment, if you don't assert yourself, you'll end up getting swallowed alive." A few colleagues nodded. Clara smiled back, brief and polite. She took a note. Then came the public corrections. "This isn't wrong," he would say, "but it's not at the level we expect here." She knew it was, but she didn't say anything. Each sentence seemed too small to justify a reaction. Each situation seemed insufficient for a confrontation. And that was the trick. Because alone, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. Clara started recording everything. First out of habit, then out of necessity. Dates, times, meetings, who was present. Audio recorded without a fuss. Archived emails, always in silence. Meanwhile, the pressure grew. She started arriving even earlier, leaving even later, double-checking everything. Even so, Ethan always found something. A detail, a word, a tone. "Maybe you need to try harder," he said once, passing her in the hallway. The sentence came low, almost intimate. "Not everyone is ready for this level." Clara nodded. When he walked away, she felt her stomach churn. But she kept walking, because she had to. And it was during this time that Robert Hayes started to notice. Not something specific, but an accumulation. He noticed her silence in meetings, the way her shoulders pulled in when Ethan spoke, the way she looked away too quickly. Robert had seen this before, at other companies, with other people. It always started the same way. One day, finding her alone by the copier, he stopped. It didn't seem like a formal approach, just a human gesture. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. Clara took a second to answer. "I am," she said. And it was true, in the way she managed to be. Robert hesitated. Then he asked the question that had been stuck in his throat. "Why don't you report him?" Clara looked up for the first time. There was surprise, but no anger. She took a deep breath before answering. "Thank you for worrying," she said sincerely. "But I know what I'm doing." Robert frowned. "He's crossing the line." Clara nodded slowly. "I know." There was a heavy silence between them. Then she added, her voice firm but low. "I need this job. For a few months. That's all." Robert opened his mouth to speak, but she was faster. "Please," she said. "Keep this to yourself. For now." She didn't beg. She didn't play the victim. She just asked. Robert held her gaze for a few seconds. Then he nodded. "All right." But as he walked away, something inside him had already changed. Because now he knew. And when someone knows, they can no longer pretend they don't see. As the weeks passed, Ethan Cole's behavior didn't change suddenly. It revealed itself. There wasn't one clear turning point. Just a sequence of small permissions he gave himself when he realized something essential. Clara Bennett didn't fight back. This made him comfortable. The corrections started to last longer, The tone remained polite, almost educational, but now it was accompanied by calculated pauses. Pauses long enough for everyone to hear, but too short to seem aggressive. "Let's review this together," he would say in meetings. To avoid future confusion, Clara remained silent while he explained something she had already done correctly. Nobody questioned it. In a meeting with outside clients, Clara was called to explain an analysis she had prepared alone. She started confidently, pointing out the data clearly. Ethan interrupted before the second slide. "Let me simplify this," he said, standing up from his chair. "Some analyses require more maturity to be properly interpreted." He took control of the presentation. The client nodded. The meeting went on. Clara sat down again. She felt something close up inside her chest. Later in the hallway, she heard someone comment in a low voice, "At least she tries." It wasn't cruelty. It was worse. It was condescension. In the following days, the tasks began to change. Reports that were too long for the given deadline. Reviews returned with vague comments. Could be better, not clear, without objective guidance. When Clara asked for clarification, Ethan responded with short sentences. "You need to learn to solve things on your own. This is part of your growth." And always in a low tone, always away from direct witnesses. She started eating lunch alone. Not because nobody liked her, but because nobody wanted to be associated with someone who was constantly corrected in public. Colleagues passed her desk with quick smiles, conversations cut short, unstated isolation. Clara noticed. And she took a note. At night, when the building was almost empty, she remained seated in front of the glowing screen. The reflection showed someone more tired than she cared to admit. She reviewed the files, organized the recordings, and wrote small observations. Monthly meeting, public correction, ambiguous comment after a praised presentation, attribution of undocumented error, all in silence. One late afternoon, Ethan called Clara into his office. The door closed with a click that was too soft for something carrying so much weight. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair. Clara obeyed. Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I want to be honest with you," he began. "I've been defending your position here." She felt a chill in her stomach. "But it's getting difficult," he continued. "Some people think you're not keeping up." Clara knew that wasn't true. "I'm delivering everything on time," she replied carefully. Ethan smiled. "Effort is important," he said. "But it's not everything." He tilted his head. "You have potential," he said with a restrained smile. "But potential without maturity usually disappoints. Maybe you need to reflect on whether this environment is really for you." The threat wasn't spoken, but it was clear. Clara nodded. "I'll do better," was all she said. When she left the room, her legs felt heavy. In the hallway, she ran into Robert Hayes. He didn't approach her immediately. He just observed the way she walked, her eyes fixed too far ahead. "He called you in," he said calmly. Clara nodded. "I saw you leave his office," Robert continued. "And I saw how you looked when you came out." There was a silence. "Is it getting heavier?" Clara took a deep breath. "It is," she replied. "But I can take it." Robert frowned. "You shouldn't have to." Clara shook her head. "Please," she said. "Just a little longer." She didn't explain anything else. She didn't need to. Robert nodded, but something in him hardened. From that day on, he began to watch more closely. Meetings, glances, silences. Meanwhile, Ethan pushed forward. He started delegating humiliating tasks, too small to justify a complaint, too big to ignore. "Just do it," he would say. "Show that you're a team player." In a larger meeting with leaders from other departments, he exposed her again. "This delay almost cost us the report," he said, looking at Clara. "We need to be more careful about who we trust with critical tasks." Her face burned. But something changed. She didn't lower her head immediately. There was an extra second of silence. A second where it seemed like she was going to speak. Ethan noticed. He smiled. Because to him, that delay confirmed his victory. She wouldn't react. Clara took a note one more time. But now, as she closed the file that night, she added a single sentence to the end of the list. Almost enough. And for the first time since it all began, she felt like time was no longer against her. The room was full. fuller than usual. In addition to the usual team, there were representatives from other departments, 2 members of compliance, and an outside guest waiting for the final quarterly presentation. The glass table reflected attentive faces, lined-up pens, and open laptops. Clara noticed this as soon as she walked in. This wasn't just another meeting. She sat in the same spot as always. Notebook closed, pen untouched. Ethan Cole looked comfortable, maybe even satisfied. He walked slowly around the room as he spoke, glancing between the charts projected on the screen and the people sitting at the table. His voice was firm, confident, trained to inspire trust. "As you can see," he said, "the team's overall performance was solid." A few people nodded. "Of course, we had small delays," he continued, stopping near the head of the table, "but nothing that couldn't be corrected." He turned toward Clara, not abruptly, in a calculated way. Except for one specific point. The air changed. Clara felt it before she even understood. "There were inconsistencies in one of the analyses," Ethan said, tapping the table with his fingertips. "And we need to talk about responsibility." A few people shifted in their chairs. A glass was placed with excessive care on the table. "Especially," he added, "when these failures come from someone who is still in the learning phase." The silence spread slowly. Clara kept her eyes on the report in front of her. She knew this choreography. She had lived this before. Ethan opened the document, projecting the exact page. "Here," he said. "This data." He looked at her. "Can you explain?" Clara took a deep breath. She didn't answer immediately. 1 second passed, then another, and for the first time, she didn't feel any urgency. She raised her hand. The gesture was simple, but enough to interrupt everything. Ethan blinked, surprised. "Yes?" he said with a half-smile. "Do you have something to add?" Clara stood up slowly. Every movement seemed conscious, controlled. "Before I answer," she said, her voice firm, "I would like to ask permission to clarify a pattern." The word hung in the air. Pattern. Ethan frowned. "Clara, this isn't—" Robert Hayes, sitting a few feet away, raised his hand slightly. "Let her speak," he said in a neutral tone. There was a moment of hesitation, but Ethan nodded. "Go ahead," he said confidently. "Be brief." Clara walked to the side of the room. She connected her laptop to the system. The screen changed. Clara stopped the cursor, breathed, and clicked. There were no charts, just a timeline. Dates. "In recent months," Clara began, "I have been corrected publicly in meetings like this." She didn't look at Ethan. Always politely, always subtly. The screen moved forward. Each of these corrections was recorded. A discreet murmur went around the table. Ethan took a step forward. "This is completely inappropriate," he said. "You don't have authorization to—" "The recordings follow internal policy and applicable law," Clara replied without raising her voice. "And they are available for verification." She clicked again. An audio clip began to play. Ethan's voice filled the room. "Maybe you should be thankful you're still here." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Clara paused. This comment was made after a meeting where the error was not mine. Another click. Another audio clip. Some people are not ready for this level. The silence now was uncomfortable. She didn't rush. This was made after a presentation that was praised by a client. Another file. Effort is not always enough. One of the compliance members leaned forward. Clara took a deep breath. "I didn't record this out of anger," she said. "Nor for revenge." She finally looked at the table. "I recorded it because I needed to survive here." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time, his smile had disappeared. "I didn't speak up before," Clara continued, "because I needed this job. Because I've been on the other side. Because I know what happens when someone speaks up without proof." She closed her laptop. But now, the proof exists. The silence was total. Robert stood up slowly. The sound of the chair scraping was the only noise in the room. "This changes everything," he said. "Without this, my hands were tied." He didn't look at Ethan immediately. He looked at Clara. "You did exactly what you needed to do." Then, he turned to Ethan. "You are suspended. Effective immediately," he said with absolute calm. The board, compliance, and legal are already aware. Ethan took a step back. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice now less steady. "She's distorting." "No," Robert interrupted. "She documented it." He made a subtle gesture. "And now, we've all heard it." Ethan looked around the room. Not a single face supported him. His confidence had evaporated. The mask had fallen, not with a scream, but with evidence. Clara remained standing. Her heart was pounding. But for the first time, there was no fear. Only a slow, deep, almost painful relief. Nobody spoke for a few seconds after the meeting ended. Chairs were pushed back with excessive care. Glasses were collected without haste. Laptops closed as if any louder sound might break something invisible that still hung in the air. Clara remained standing. Not because she didn't know where to sit, but because, for a moment, she no longer knew who she needed to be now. Her body trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from something much harder to recognize. Relief. Robert approached slowly. He didn't put a hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything grand. He just stood beside her. "You can go home," he said in a low voice. "The rest will be handled formally." Clara nodded. She gathered her things with movements that were too calm for someone who had just crossed months of accumulated tension. She put away her notebook, closed her bag, held her badge for a second longer than necessary. When she walked through the glass door, she felt something unexpected. Silence. Not the heavy silence of the meetings, but a light silence. Almost gentle. In the elevator, alone, she leaned her back against the metal wall and closed her eyes. She breathed. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't have to prepare for the next attack. In the days that followed, the office changed. Not drastically, but noticeably. Ethan Cole was no longer there. His name wasn't mentioned in meetings. His chair was removed. His email, deactivated. Nobody commented openly, but everyone knew. Clara returned to work the following week. She walked through the same hallways, sat at the same desk, turned on the same computer. But something had changed. People spoke to her differently, a little more carefully, a little more honestly. Some looked away, maybe out of guilt. Others smiled timidly, as if they wanted to say something and didn't know how. Clara didn't demand anything. She didn't need to. One late afternoon, Robert called Clara into his office. This time, the door remained open. "You did something difficult," he said after she sat down. "And you did it the right way." Clara kept her hands resting in her lap. "I just waited," she replied. Robert shook his head. "Waiting is also a choice." There was a brief silence. "I know you needed this job," he continued. "And I know the cost of that." Clara nodded. "It wasn't easy," she said, "but losing it would have been worse." Robert took a deep breath. "You're not going to lose it," he replied. "Not now." There was no exaggerated promise. No immediate reward. Just recognition. That night, Clara got home earlier. She sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands. She opened the folder where she had kept everything for months. Audio clips, notes, dates. She ran her fingers across the screen slowly. And then, one by one, she began to delete them. Not out of obligation, but because she didn't need to carry that anymore. When she finished, she set the phone aside and just sat there in silence. The weight leaving didn't make any noise, but it left space. In the months that followed, Clara grew. Not in a spectacular way, but in a real way. She spoke more in meetings. Not every time, but when it mattered. She learned that silence is strength when it's a choice, and a prison when it's imposed. On an ordinary day, as she left the building, she stopped in front of the revolving glass door. She observed her reflection. She didn't look like someone different, but she was. She walked through the door and onto the sidewalk, blending into the city that never knew what she had endured. And it didn't need to know. Because some victories don't ask for applause. They only ask for space to breathe. And maybe that's what nobody in that company understood at the beginning. She never responded when they expected weakness. She responded only when the silence had already said it all. If this story touched your heart, I'd be grateful if you like and subscribe. You will receive daily stories that remind us why kindness, justice, and dignity still matter.